Okay, let's get started on a lesson on the semicolon. Any questions?
Yeah, why are we studying the semicolon if I never see it used?
Fair question. And you're right, you rarely see the semicolon in popular writing, such as magazines, newspapers, on the web and TV. That's because of length.
Length?
Yeah, in consumer writing, sentences are rarely long enough to need a semicolon. But there are other types of writing where the semicolon is useful and common.
Like school?
Very much so. Academic writing is usually more complex because of the subject matter and its analytical approach.
So that means you have to use semicolons.
That's right. If the situation fits, one of the three most common uses of the semicolon in academic writing.
And what would those uses be?
Well, the first one is called an internal period.
A what period?
Internal period. Internal period. It's the same as a regular period, except you don't capitalize after it. Here's an example. In basketball, slam dunks thrill the crowd. 3-point shots win the games. Now, how many sentences do you see?
2. One about slam dunks, one about 3-point shots. So why a semicolon between them and not a period?
That's the question, isn't it? If two sentences have a close relationship you want to highlight for the reader, a semicolon works. Do these sentences have a close relationship?
Yeah, they're giving a back-to-back comparison between slam dunks and 3-pointers.
Exactly. And the semicolon lets the reader see that comparison better than a period would.
Why is that?
Because a period makes the reader pause longer, and the capital letter on the next sentence reinforces the pause between the two.
Couldn't you just put a word like but to join them?
Good question. Yes, you could. But what if you've already used that construction and now you need to have a different way of doing it to avoid being redundant? The semicolon gives you another option while also lending variety and interest to your writing.
Definitely could see more use of those in my writing. But how do I know when to use a semicolon and when to use a real period?
Well, I'm sorry to have to say this, but it depends.
Depends on what?
You. Punctuation marks like the semicolon let you, the writer, add your voice to the writing because punctuation guides your reader. It tells the reader where to pause and for how long. What parts of the sentences are related and how closely. So, if you, the writer, want to show that two ideas are more closely related than a period would let you, use a semicolon.
Following you.
Okay, here let's look at these pairs of sentences. In the 1990s, everyone had to get an email address. In the 21st century, everyone will have to get an avatar. At age 62, Georgette earned a bachelor's degree. Everyone in her family was inspired to work harder. Now, which pair of sentences would benefit more from the semicolon?
Definitely the first pair.
Okay, why?
Well, both sentences have the same order. First the date, then the word everyone, then what everyone had to get. They're closely related in a way the second pair isn't.
Excellent. Some people might also say the first pair would flow better with a semicolon. However you describe it, the semicolon here brings the two ideas closer together than a period would.
What if I want to put some kind of transition between the two sentences? Can I still use a semicolon?
Sure you can. There's a group of words called conjunctive adverbs that are placed after the semicolon to indicate a relationship between the two sentences.
Conjunctive adverbs? Sounds like a sinus condition.
Conjunctive is Latin for join together, but you can call them transition words. I bet you already know most of them. However, consequently, therefore, nevertheless. Sometimes you use connected phrases like as a result, for example, or in fact. Any of those sound familiar?
You're right, they do. What's the rule for using them with semicolons?
A simple rule, really. When a transition is used between two sentences, place a semicolon before the transition and a comma after it. Here's an example. The test results are not complete, semicolon. Therefore, comma, the committee cannot make a decision. You see, a semicolon comes before therefore and a comma after it.
So a comma always goes after a transition?
Pretty much.
Okay, I think I've got it. A semicolon brings two sentences together better than a period does. Anything else?
Well, there's one other time when a semicolon comes in handy. It's called the complex list, which means that each item on the list already has its own comma, so you need to add semicolons between the items.
Example, please.
Let's say you wanted to provide a list of cities and states in a sentence. You would write, according to a recent study, the top 5 greenest cities in America are Portland, Oregon, semicolon, San Francisco, California, semicolon, Boston, Massachusetts, semicolon, Oakland, California, semicolon, and Eugene, Oregon, period.
I see. So I put the semicolon after each city-state pair.
Exactly. Now the list is much easier to read. The semicolon does some important visual work for the reader.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. Anything else I should watch out for?
Well, one of the common mistakes when using a semicolon is confusing it with a comma. The semicolon has very specific uses and can rarely substitute for a comma. For example, unless you floss between your teeth on a consistent basis, your chances of developing gum disease are nearly doubled. Now, what should come after basis, a comma or a semicolon?
Comma. Those aren't two complete sentences, so you can't put an internal period between them. An internal period is just another name for the semicolon, right?
Right.
Any others?
Another common mistake is not using a semicolon when it's required. Look at this example. Coral reefs look like underwater gardens with colorful plants, comma. However, comma, corals are actually tiny animals that secrete limestone. Now, what should come after comma or semicolon?
Semicolon.
Why?
The word however is a transition, so a semicolon has to come before it.
Right. In academic writing, put a semicolon in front of transition words or phrases like however, as a result, and so on.
I think I'm ready to give the semicolon a try in my own writing.
Outstanding. I know you're going to do great with semicolons.